In this section of this course, I like to discuss how API authentication authorization is discovered for APIs by the platform. It is important for us to identify correctly the authentication and authorization mechanism that is employed by the APIs. Why this is important? Number one, you get correct data being displayed under the inventory. You reduce the noise from false positive findings and or incidents. Okay, imagine the scenario whereby the authentication information are provided, but the no-name platform does not recognize it. I'm going to discuss why in a few minutes. And as a result, the no-name platform triggers incidents and findings, creating additional noise for you guys. Right? For you, I mean the no-name platform operators, right? Distracting you from the actual true positives. Okay. All right. We're going to follow the same pattern like every other recording we have seen so far, which is we're going to go under settings and I'm going to navigate under user management and I'm going to go under roles and I'm going to edit the admin because after all I am an admin, and I'm going to go under inventory settings. I'm going to expand it, and there is the authentication and identification permission that controls whether you have the level you have for the authentication and identification settings page. Okay, I have read write, so I can change it if I wanted to. So I'm going to cancel all that, and I'm going to navigate under the authentication identification. Okay, so before we begin, let's see how authentication works. If I take you under more information, it's going to take us to the documentation page right here. And number one, you're going to get to see the algorithm of how authentication works. Number two, it's about closer to the bottom. You will see the authentication mechanisms, authentication and authorization mechanisms that the no-name platform is able to identify out of the box. AWS credentials, Azure function admin, basic authentication, JSON Web Token, and unclassified. Okay, all of these are standardized with the exception of unclassified. And what the heck is unclassified, you may be wondering. Unclassified is the authentication and authorization mechanism that the no-name platform is able to identify by inspecting traffic, in particular by inspecting HTTP status codes. Okay, if we are not able to identify the mechanism, but we're able to see HTTP status codes such as 401 unauthorized or 403 forbidden in your traffic, in your API traffic, then we're clearly able to understand that there is an authentication mechanism, but it's non-standard because we're not able to recognize it from the request. So we stick to it, an unclassified tag. Okay, and now it's up to us to go ahead and identify the appropriate authentication authorization mechanism and tell the no-name platform, hey, this is authenticated, here's where the authentication is. Okay, so that's what unclassified refers to. It's an authentication and authorization mechanism that we have not discovered, but we suspect it is present because of the response HTTP statuses. Okay, all right. Now I can take you back to the no-name platform or the platform, and I can discuss authentications. All right, so out of the box, a JSON Web Token that is present in an authorization header is clearly understood by the no-name platform. That's why I didn't have to do any changes, and I already have identified this authorization mechanism as being the authentication mechanism for 10 APIs. Okay, if I take you back to inventory and back to APIs, you will get to see it right here. Okay, it's an authorization header where the subscriber is the claim that contains the user identifier for the JSON Web Token. Okay, the rest is header authorization, header authorization, header authorization, and so on. Okay, as you can see, this particular one doesn't have all that extra information. It doesn't tell you that there's a sub. Okay, it doesn't tell you a lot of information. Okay, this one does. Okay, all right. So let's carry on with the explanations. By the way, we have an API that truly does not have any authentication, and that's why you see it as non-detected. Okay, all right. Back to the settings. Authentication identification. So I can come in here and I can create an additional authentication field. If I'm following something that is non-standard, right? Or if my developers choose to use something that is non-standard, and by the way, best practice is always use standard mechanisms, but there's plenty of APIs out there that do not, so we need to accommodate for them. Okay. So what you come in here and do is identify the field name. The field, well, that depends on the field location. If you select header, then the field name must be. If it's a query, then the field name must be the query parameter name. If it's a cookie, then it has to be the cookie name. And if it's in the body, then you provide the field name within the request body that contains your authentication authorization information. Okay, that's what you need to provide. And again, it doesn't require a JSON path. It just requires the field name. I don't care if it's like 3 levels deep, right? You need to provide that field name. Okay, just the field name. And now you can do all that and you can create an additional authentication mechanism. Okay, so let's cancel. Let's go to user identifier. So that's how you create a new authentication authorization custom mechanism, right? That your developers are using, that the platform needs to be aware of so that it can pick up those authentication credentials. Okay. For user identifiers, okay, what the heck is that? What the heck does that mean? A user identifier refers to the actual user or application that is accessing the application. And you may argue, well, I just did this under authentication. Well, not necessarily. You did not do that under authentication, right? What you did is you provided the location of the actual information, right? Where is the authentication and authorization information provided? But you may be using an additional field or additional information within the authentication that I need to look at in order to locate the actual user identifier. Okay? And I remind you back, and I want to remind you back when we were in inventory, when we were under APIs, we had an entry that said header authorization subscriber claim under the JSON Web Token that contains the user identifier. Okay. All right. So back to the settings, back to authentication authorization. So you can come in here, you can create additional identifiers. This is very similar to what we've seen earlier on. The difference is that now you have header, query, and cookie. And you can come in here, you can say, well, what's the header? Right? And you can provide the header name or the cookie name or the query parameter name. And if it's a JSON Web Token, you can provide now the claim. Right? Okay, what's the claim? Well, it's ID. Right? So I'm not looking for sub, I'm looking for ID. Or I may be looking for name. Right? And again, a JSON Web Token has a number of different claims, guys. Go to the spec and look that up. Right? But I'm going to take you to JSONWebToken.io because sub is the default. Right? Sub is the default right here. Okay. So if I look at the spec, I'll be able to track that down. So if I'm using sub, then the domain platform is going to pick it up without any additional information. If not, and I'm using something else, I don't know, maybe name, then I will have to come in here under add identifier and provide that extra information, right? Let's cancel that too. Last but not least, user IPs. Where does the platform need to look at in order to update? Where did this particular API request originated from? The list of header names that you see in this particular panel or table, these are in hierarchical order, which means I'm going to check the first one. Do I have an X forwarded 4 in my request? I do. Great. I'm going to use the value as my originating IP, and I'm not going to continue checking all the other headers. Okay. If it's not present, then I'm going to look for a client IP. If it's also not present, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going. And if I see, right, an X real IP, then I'm going to use that value as my originating IP and I'm going to ignore the rest. You can change, you can keep adding, you can add user headers, just add the header name, and then you can keep moving the priority up or down, up to you, okay, in order to meet the requirements of your API ecosystem, okay? So with this, my good people, we have concluded. Oh, before I say we have concluded, where is this information used? Well, where's the user identifier and the authentication? Well, I showed you one area already under inventory APIs, right? Well, it's also used under security. If I take you under runtime and I take you under attackers, well, now you're going to get to see the different users that have used the API in an abnormal manner. One of those is that JSON Web Token, right? The subscriber, right? The sub claim. Others, they don't have any such detailed information. We can't track down the individual user. So that's why you get to see the IP, right? At the end of the day, it's going to resolve to the IP. If we find no other user information, no authentication and authorization credentials, then it's going to be the actual IP that we're going to use to identify that particular user. Okay? So that's where it's used. And you can go ahead and block them and do whatever the heck you need to do. And now we have concluded this particular section of our course.